So welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Wayne McRoy is back. My goodness, I had a blank. I forgot your name. Can you believe that? So Wayne McRoy is back, and we are going to talk about Lemuria. So, before we do that, Wayne, we just recently had the eclipse. Let me ask you. Do you think that, let's say, the eclipse had been over Botswana or Sri Lanka, do you think it would have been such a hype?
No, most certainly not. It seems that very many people are kind of Western culture centric with this kind of thing. And of course, America sits at the heart of this. But I think the main reason there was a lot of key importance put on this eclipse is because of the nature of the location of where it was at. It did go over America. And if you know anything about occultism or these occultists and these dark powers that run and operate this world, you know that they have a particular vested interest here in America because they view it as the new Atlantis. So I think that's why they put a whole lot of importance upon this particular eclipse over America here because it does pass over their new Atlantis. So that being the case, I would say if it was somewhere else in the world, probably wouldn't have gotten as much attention.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, okay, everything was on the table again. Yeah. But, and yes, there were oddities around it. For example, activating the National Guard, I found that a little bit over the top uh, for an event that lasts 4 minutes or something like that. But okay, it's not my decision. And yeah, and then from EMP attack to the rapture is coming, the second coming is here, and Judgment Day is here, and the speculations were running wild. But so far, as I know, nobody got raptured.
No, and that's the thing. A lot of people, with an event like this, they always put into full focus, and especially in the mainstream media, but also now in what you would call the alternative media, because now that's largely been hijacked as well. They will put these people who make these wild claims about things like this, and this is supposed to represent critical thinkers, people like us who like to take a look at these types of notions and situations and agendas and analyze what's going on. So it makes us look silly. Let's put it that way. So they do that on purpose. They push these kind of things out there in the mainstream, get everybody hyped up. And they've even gone so far, like you said, as to send the National Guard out. I have no idea why. Honestly, nothing happened with any of it. Now maybe there was some traffic in the corridors of the places where they had the best view, but even then, is it really necessary to have the National Guard out? Certainly not. The other interesting thing is NASA actually launched rockets up there called APEP. It's a program called APEP to study the effects of the eclipse during the eclipse. They did this. So this is all documented too. So we have all of these different crossovers. And if you look into APEP, that's actually another name for Apophis, if you're familiar with the Egyptian
Mhm.
god Apophis. So they always have these occult connotations attached to this stuff. And they do this kind of thing. And it's captured a lot of attention, but for all the wrong reasons. And people will draw spurious, different types of notions from this, where they'll present things like, okay, this is the end of the world. This is going to be the rapture. This is this is that, when it's not necessarily the case. Now, if you go back and you look into the mystery schools and the occultism that goes behind a lot of this stuff, you understand that events like an eclipse have always been some type of a marker in the sky and have always been a type of harbinger of things to come. They leverage these events against the masses in many ways because there are some serious energetic principles involved with it that they understand better than the average person. So they leverage these ideas against the minds of men. But largely, they'll come out into the public view with notions like we had here with this, where people are predicting the second coming, they're predicting all of these different negative events right at the time of the eclipse. And of course, none of that has ever come to pass. And they do this on purpose because they want you to just disregard any type of an esoteric or spiritual notion associated with these energetic influences from the sky. They want you to think of that as silly and nonsensical. So they present you with these worst case scenario type of ordeals that people come forward with, and they make these wild claims. And of course, it doesn't come to fruition. So people will be like, and they'll say, "No, well, it was all a bunch of nonsense. It was a big nothing burger. No big deal. Move on with their lives and forget about it." Well, the thing with these events that happen in the sky clock or in the sky, these energetic principles that get leveraged against us from these inherent natural forces or energies that we can see in the sky, they take time to actually bring a manifestation into being. So even if they are leveraging something against us, it won't come to manifestation until sometime later. And that's what gets lost on most people. So if you're looking for something to immediately happen during one of these events, you're going to be disappointed every time. And that's the whole notion of this. But it doesn't mean that there's not some type of an energetic influence at play here. I most certainly think that's demonstrable. They've even tried to scientifically measure these type of things. They'll say they can measure gamma ray bursts from the sky, from space, and this kind of thing. And they can see these energies inherent that hit the earth and can affect the earth. They'll tell you solar flares can certainly affect things here on earth. Well, it's the same type of thing, except there's a spiritual undertone to it. And that's the thing where people miss the point with this. So there's a very real energy there, and they can guide and direct it if they know what they're doing. And many of these dark occultists in high places of prominence in this world do know how to manipulate those energies, and they do use them, leverage them against the masses in many ways. But it's not always an immediate effect. And that's where people kind of miss the whole point with a lot of it. So I think this was a big signal because there were so many different things associated with it. You had all these planetary conjunctions happening. You had this comet, this quote unquote devil comet that appeared during this event. And it was a major event. And of course, it was over America, their new Atlantis. So there is a lot of esoteric significance to it. So that being the case, all the doomsayers out there were wrong, and everybody knows it. And here we are, and nothing has really come of it. But there are some interesting synchromistic type things that have happened in regards to this. Like, for instance, I just found out yesterday, I was looking into this. The gentleman, his name was Peter Higgs, the gentleman who discovered the Higgs boson, or claims to have discovered what they call the Higgs boson, passed away on the day of the eclipse at 94 years of age. And wouldn't you know it, CERN was also running experiments trying to find more details about the Higgs boson on the day of the eclipse. So you have all of these synchromistic types of events happening at the same time, and you have to wonder, is it coincidence? Is it something whereby there were energetic principles being leveraged? Is there something to it at all? Or what's the deal here? Or are we being lied to? And it could be any or all of those in regards to this stuff. But I always find it interesting to find those little details about things going on. So we have all of that going on concurrently with this event. And maybe there's nothing going on to all of that. Maybe it's just to draw our attention away. But certainly we can see these things and understand there's some significance to the event overall. Now, what that pans out being, I don't know, and I don't claim to know. We'll see what the future holds for us. But we can certainly agree that much of what's been presented in the media, especially on social media about this, has been untrue, has not come to pass, has been a whole lot of doomsaying for no good reason. And I don't really think anybody really truly panicked about it. I think everybody pretty much expects at this point that an event like this is usually going to produce nothing, but you're always going to have those people that are panicky about it and trying to push and promote fear. And always remember, if something's out there promoting fear, that's not for you. It's not good or healthy for you. And chances are nothing's going to come of that. So don't buy into that narrative. That's the whole point here, because that's one of the main ways that they control the masses is through this fear agenda. So they may have set up all this stuff, the instituting the National Guard and all of that, just to kind of further ramp up that fear in the psyches of the masses. But by and large, nothing major happened, did it? So we'll see what happens in the coming days.
Yeah, yeah. There was one gentleman on YouTube who pointed out, well, guys, you are ignoring, that was in the Christian community, you are ignoring the rest of the prophecies, what has to happen first. And then in the comment section, a lot of people were not very happy with him, telling him that they have the impression he is trying to push it further into the future, as if he could. And but at the end of the day, he was correct.
Well, that's the thing. So many people get so vested into these types of ideas that they can't just take a step back and say, I don't know. You see,
Mm.
that's that whole cognitive dissonance thing. We don't know what we don't know. And that's the problem with a lot of this stuff. So a lot of people will vest a lot of energy towards this thing. And when it doesn't come to pass, they'll have disappointment, of course, but it doesn't seem to deter them from buying into the next lie when it comes down to it. So, yeah, I mean, even if you could go ahead and break apart this and say, well, X, Y, and Z have to fall in place first when it comes to the prophetic timeline of things, and that's certainly correct. A lot of people will push that to the side because it's not immediate in their viewpoint right now. So they, for some reason, have this longing for this to be true. It's the same thing that goes on with this Q narrative, this whole Q intel operation that's gone on. They want to believe. It's the old X-Files thing. I want to believe, even though time and again, it just keeps failing to come to fruition. And it just continues. It's amazing how people will still vest interest and energy and attention into this narrative that keeps falling apart every time you look at it a little bit more closely. It's lazy. And that's the problem. A lot of people don't want to actively investigate anything for themselves or actively try to put two and two together for themselves to come to some notion of truth. So they depend upon somebody else telling them what's true and what's really happening. And
Mm.
that's where we can't really be. We need to know for ourselves.
And also this QAnon thing, that also demonstrates how deeply seated this wish for a savior is, and that is my, yeah, how should I put this? This is my stand. If I smell a savior program, I immediately step away from it. And so far, it has served me well. And it has prevented me to put my hopes into nonsense.
Understandable. Well, that's the whole thing. You see, the controllers of this world and these dark occultists who run things in this world, they're very, very familiar with human psychology. They know how the human psyche works. They know that oftentimes we will look for this external savior to remedy the problem because we don't want to step up and face the responsibility of the problem for ourselves. You see, it's a type of immaturity and it's a way that they've engineered society over the course of the past 50 years. It's called arrested development. Your average person in the public in Western culture has the mindset of a 12 or 13-year-old. Seriously, I mean, this is a true thing. They want you trapped in that adolescent type state where you always depend upon the adults to solve the problems. You don't want to have the responsibility. You like to be able to have the freedoms and do what you want to do, but you don't want to step up and take responsibility for your actions. You don't want to get vested or involved in things in the community all around you and have any type of responsibility for any of this stuff. That's why a lot of people don't get involved in politics. It's not something people want to get involved in because you don't want the responsibility. If something goes wrong, you don't want to be the one to take the blame. And what this does is this causes people to abdicate their own personal responsibility, their own personal, how should we say, stake in things. They abdicate that to somebody else as a representative of them. And this is the whole point of politics. So this is largely what we have done as a culture. We step away, let somebody else handle it. You know, that's the thing. That's above my pay grade. How many times have you heard people say things like that? That's above my pay grade. I don't know enough about that. Let somebody else worry about that. Let somebody else solve that problem. Well, that's largely what has happened is they've engineered this complacency into the culture at large, and we don't want to step up and be responsible for ourselves or for others. And that's shameful, really. But this is what's been engineered into society. So we have this childlike mindset. And here's the thing with the childlike mindset: if you have that, then that also necessitates you need someone to guide and direct you, an authority figure, an adult, if you will, to guide and direct you. Well, who is that? Largely, that's government steps in and takes up that role as parent to guide you. So they tell you what you can and can't do. And they've doubled down on this more and more through the decades now, since at least the end of World War II. This has been socially engineered into mankind, where we are in this state of arrested development. And they want to tell us what to do. So you have these few responsible people who take charge of all of our wealth and our resources and allocate them how they see fit. They're the decision makers. You see, that's what's happened is they don't want us to make decisions, and they've engineered us socially to not make decisions for ourselves, to leave that to somebody else. And most just blindly follow along in this program. They go to work, they do their jobs, and then largely they try to entertain themselves in whatever free time they have from their job that their corporate masters have applied to them. And many people call this freedom when really it's not. I know so many people who just work their lives away. I've seen it too many times where I see people, they'll spend most, if not all, of their waking hours devoted to some company or something, doing this job that nobody seems to be thankful for. They don't get their just dues ever. And they work away their lives, maybe taking a week or two vacation every year. And by the time they retire, well, there's nothing left in them. I've seen this happen too many times. I had a former boss of mine when I was still in the corporate world who he retired, and it was less than a year he died. He finally retires, and he couldn't even enjoy his retirement. And he spent all of his life just working this job and doing everything for the company. And you know what? When he retired, they replaced him the very next day. And things went on as if he wasn't even there. No gratitude for anything he'd done, no recognition. Just good luck, enjoy your retirement. And he had already spent so much of his physical energy devoted to the job that by the time he retired, he couldn't even really enjoy his retirement. And I've seen this numerous times. That's not the only time I've seen that. So it just gets to be where, how programmed are we in this society? And they know this. They take advantage of this. And they've engineered us to be in this state where we just want to abdicate our authority and our responsibility to somebody else and just try to find entertainment when and how we can, not realizing that what we're doing is we're toiling away, grasping at wind, pretty much. That's how the Bible would describe it, this grasping at wind. And it leaves us with nothing in the end, really. And it's sad to say, but there's better ways out there. And of course, this has to do with taking personal responsibility, stepping up and doing the right thing just because it's the right thing to do, rather than being told what to do.
Yeah, totally agree. So, Lemuria. Yeah, I would say this is a subject. There is not a lot of middle ground, if any. Either people are, yay, Lemuria, it's all real, or you have the other camp that says total nonsense. And it started out as I would say, a scientific idea or hypothesis. And Mr. Phillip Sclater, he assumed because of these lemurs that he found here and then there, that there must have been a continent that got lost. But pretty soon after that, I would say it got hijacked by, Madame Blavatsky and other people. And from there on out, it was pretty much an esoteric teaching. What is your take?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, there are these occult traditions that go back even prior to this guy coming out with this scientifically valid claim that spoke of this vast southern continent called Lemuria and a civilization that previously had allegedly flourished there back in antiquity. This is part of what they call the Secret Doctrine. Now, Blavatsky really took hold of this and went in all kinds of weird directions with it for sure. But also, the Rosicrucians have these traditions as well. So they are older than the Theosophical Society, and they are older than the Rosicrucians, and they tie back to some of the old Hermetic teachings as well. So we've had these traditions through occultism, and what has happened is they have this scientific community coming forward and saying, hey, the evidence would suggest that at one time there was this vast southern continent based upon the animal life that we see in these certain places, the relationship between them. So they took hold of this idea and they used it to try to further reify their already existent belief in this ancient Lemurian continent. So this is an interesting topic, and I've researched it in depth at this point because I'm very curious about the origins of man and exactly what it is that these secret society groups believe and these occultists behind the scenes believe about the nature of our reality. And they always seem to tie everything back not only to this previous civilization that we would know as Atlantis or the Atlantean civilization, but even prior to that. This is when Lemuria was said to exist, is prior to the Atlantean epoch. Now, they refer to these things in the Rosicrucian teachings as epochs. We had the Lemurian epoch and we had the Atlantean epoch. And even prior to the Lemurian epoch, they claim we had the Hyperborean epoch. So there's all these traditions of these different ages in which man evolved in different ways, mostly going back to this notion of evolution as intended in the spiritual sense, intended in the original sense of the mystery school teachings, not to be conflated with Darwinian evolution. But we'll see as we get to this topic a little further. What they've attempted to do is to reify their belief in this spiritual evolution state by coming up with this physical notion of Darwinian evolution to back up those claims. So this is what was presented into society. And you'll notice all of these things seem to have arisen at around the same time frame in the mid to late 1800s. Well, that's not a coincidence. We had not only the alleged discovery of the dinosaurs, we had this rise of the ideas and notions of Darwinian evolution concurrently going on with the pushing of eugenics, and that's directly where Darwinian evolution comes from, is eugenics. And they're all based upon some of these older occult belief systems about root races dating back to these epochs. So this is why it's an important thing to discuss and to look at, because what I like to tell people all the time with this stuff, what you believe about it is irrelevant. What you need to understand is there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these things, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs in these things will affect all of us. So it's important that you understand what it is they believe, and then you have a better grasp as to why they do the things they do, and to some degree, how they do the things they do. And once you know that, I mean, it's game over for these people. If enough people are aware of this type of knowledge and understand, okay, this whack job believes this, and that's why they're doing this. Once you know that, it all begins to make more sense to you, and it opens your eyes to a whole world of possibilities that you hadn't previously known. But that's the whole notion of where this comes from. It comes from these different epochs. And I think the Rosicrucian teachings align this in the best linear type way to put it together. They have the Hyperborean epoch, the Lemurian epoch, and the Atlantean epoch. And it's interesting to see these claims that they make in the secret schools as to how man developed, not only physically, but spiritually during those previous epochs, and how they always seem to go the same way through the cycles of time, that we have these inherent cycles of time that are repetitive. And of course, this falls back to the Hermetic principles once again. Everything's cyclical in its nature. This is the Hermetic principle of rhythm. Everything's cyclical in its nature. So we naturally go through these processes or these cycles of time. And what has happened is always you've had these developmental ages of these root races of man that have always ended in a cataclysm that destroyed the vast majority of the population, but there was always a remnant that remained, and they evolved into the next state of mankind. So this is what the tradition is in the old teachings here. And like I said, I like to look at the Rosicrucian version of this because I think it gives you the best progression, the linear progression of all of it, and gives you a rough idea as to what it is that is believed about this. Now, all these different secret society groups and occult traditions, they have these same ideas in all of them. They present the same ideas. Sometimes the names they give to them are a little different, though, and this is what causes confusion. But like I said, the Rosicrucian map for this is probably the best, and you can actually find this in Max Heindel's The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. If you want to look into that, he has a great deal about the cycles in which these epochs developed: the Hyperborean epoch, the Lemurian epoch, and the Atlantean epoch, and then ultimately our modern day that we are in now, and what the culmination of that is supposed to be. And of course, if you dig deeply enough, you'll understand that what this is going to ultimately cultivate in, according to the secret schools and those with the vested interest in it, is the advent of transhumanism. And this is something I can't emphasize enough. I sound like a broken record because it always ties back to this. Always, always, always. It's always the occult and it's always transhumanism. As much as I wish that wasn't the case, all of these topics, anything that you would consider a conspiratorial type topic or something like that, it always culminates in both of those places, the occult and transhumanism. And that's 100% the case here. You could tie all this back to these old teachings that they give in the secret schools. Now, the thing is, a lot of this information has been hidden from us for the longest time. It's only over the course of about the past 10 to 15 years that much of this has come out to public knowledge, thanks to the internet. This tool that they built to enslave us, I think there was an unintended consequence of this information actually getting out to the public because it is useful. So a lot of these people, they wanted to digitize some of these old works so they had easier access to it. And lo and behold, it got out to the public. These things, you used to only be able to find this type of information if you had access to a good Masonic library or a Masonic publishing house or some such resource like that you knew somebody and you were in good standing to get it. Well, now it's public domain. So there's people that have been looking at this stuff now and trying to reverse engineer it, people like myself. And that's largely what I spend a lot of time doing. I'm an avid reader. I like to find some of these old books and read about what it is they said and see where the certain traditions and ideas come from and see how they've been twisted and contorted through time. So that's largely the kinds of things I break apart. And this is something that's been on my radar a lot lately because we don't truly understand the origins of mankind. And this gives a different outlook than what we're taught in our mainstream education system. This is something totally different as to what we're taught about the true history of mankind, the history of the earth, and how all of these things came about. So going back and looking at this stuff, it's a fascinating topic to look at, and we can go through some of the specifics about what it is that they claim in these secret society groups about this. And like I said, I always tell people, take this stuff with a grain of salt. There's really no way to prove nor disprove any of this. But you start to get a better picture and things make a lot more sense when you look at the world through this lens of observation. And when you do, and you see that this is the belief system of the people that are controlling things right now, you understand a little better why they're doing the things they do and what you could possibly expect next. So that's the bottom line with all of it.
Yeah, and I think you are right that the Rosicrucian take is important, and also simply because they are pretty high up in the hierarchy, the Rosicrucians. What many people don't understand, they still think it's yeah, I don't know. You have some people say it's always the Jews, others say it's the Jesuits, others say it's, and I'm not saying it's always the Rosicrucians, no, but they are definitely in the pecking order pretty high up.
Certainly they are. And this is something that escapes the notice of most people, too. All of those different groups you mentioned, there's an inner circle to all of them. And at the
Yeah.
topmost levels of all of these groups, they're interlocked and interrelated. It's like an inner circle within the inner circle. And this is what would commonly be referred to by most people who look at this today as the Illuminati. And of course, largely we've been taught to think of that term as being total nonsense. But I have books that have the logo on it on the front that say Temple of the Illuminati from back in the early 1900s and late 1800s. These are subgroups within the power structure, within these secret society groups. It's an inner circle within an inner circle, and they have certain belief systems that they promulgate at the highest, most levels too. But you have to advance really high up into these other occult fraternities to even be considered to get into that inner circle. And this is something that people will largely look at and laugh and scoff about because that's what we've been indoctrinated to believe about this notion of the Illuminati. They send out all these rappers and musicians and entertainers out there covering one eye and throwing up hand signs and wearing their gold chains, and they just think it's silly and it's nonsensical and it's just this guy trying to make some money or look bad, this kind of thing. And they laugh it off, and we've been indoctrinated to think that way on purpose. And of course, if you go into the historical context of what the Illuminati is as well, if you read the mainline history of that group, you'll discover that what they try to do is they try to equate it back to Isaac Weishaupt. Not Isaac Weishaupt, excuse me, Adam Weishaupt. I'm thinking of another researcher named Isaac Weishaupt. But Adam Weishaupt, he was the founder of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, and he was a Jesuit trained minister of canon law at Ingolstadt University. So he brought forward some of these ideas. He founded this organization. They infiltrated other secret society groups at the highest, most levels and positions in government and business throughout the world. And they presented their ideas in those ways, and they got discovered and allegedly were disbanded around 1790 at some point, and all trace of them had disappeared, according to mainstream history. But if you go back through the secret schools, through the secret Masonic libraries and stuff like that, through their writings, you'll find material naming the Illuminati, the continuation of the Illuminati into the modern era, all the way up to today. It still exists. It's still a thing. And a lot of it actually intertwines right now in the modern era with what's known as the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis organization that Aleister Crowley had a big part in. So we have all of these different interconnections with a lot of this stuff too. All these secret society groups tie together at some point at the highest, most levels. And that's what people miss the point on. So many of the teachings, they're all the same. That's the whole point here. When you go back and you look, they're teaching all the same things, just with their own spin or agenda put on it at points, and some of their own language applied or descriptive terms applied. But it's all the same core teachings. So this whole notion of this secret history, this secret doctrine, it's the same throughout all of them. Now, is it true? That's the other question. I don't know. Is this the true history of Earth? I don't know. But this is what they claim. This is what they claim are the secrets of the ages that they've kept within their secret establishments throughout the course of time. So it's important we understand what they believe about the history of the world.
Yeah, and then
And
you will
largely,
understand their mind.
I'm sorry?
And then you will understand their mindset.
Exactly. And that's the whole point. If you understand who your enemy is and how they operate, that gives you a better vantage point and a better way of battling back. So it's important to understand this. So this is actually what they believe is the true history of the Earth, and they keep it hidden from us, and they laugh at us when we lap up all the nonsense they give us, like dinosaurs and all of these things having been the dinosaur species was on the Earth and they were wiped out by this comet 66 million years ago. It's always these same numbers, right? 66 million years ago, a 6-mile wide comet hit the Earth. This is what they say in the mainstream notion of things. It's a poke in the eye for people without eyes to see. But they give us this. This is the main history. And then what they're not telling us is that they believe that there was actually a race of mankind existed on the Earth at that time. And that this cataclysmic event that they talked about, this is what wiped out Lemuria. Okay, they even say in their Secret Doctrine that at that time, man, that iteration of man, the Lemurian, had actually domesticated dinosaurs for hunting. That man and dinosaurs existed together, coexisted together. This is in their Secret Doctrine. And this is the thing, and you don't have to take my word for it. I could give you several resources. Go look. This is exactly what they say and what they claim. And I've done several episodes now of my podcast on this Secret Doctrine, this secret history of the world. And I actually transcribed it into book format for people out there if they're interested. It's 5 episodes altogether that talks about this secret history about Atlantis and how we come from Atlantis. But I've even delved deeper into the Lemurian side of this too. I haven't put out the transcripts for that yet, but I do intend to do so at some point. We'll put together the Lemurian transcripts to show the progression, how they got from Lemuria to Atlantis to the modern era. So this is what they teach in their secret schools through their secret doctrine. This is what they believe is the true history of the world, and this is why they act on things the way they do. And it all falls back on this notion that these times and seasons are cyclical, and I think that's demonstrable to some degree, and that we're reaching a tipping point in our history now where the next cataclysm may be coming, and they want to be the ones to advance to the next level. They want to be the remnant that remains, that evolves to the next level of humanity. That's what their claims are. Now, like I said, if there's any validity to these notions or not, I don't know. I don't know, and I don't claim to know. I'm just a guy who's trying to put two and two together to try and back engineer what it is that they've built here in this society right now. And I could tell you what it is they believe, and I could understand their vantage point with this. Doesn't necessarily make it true, though. They could be acting on invalid information as well, because when it comes down to it, there's no way to really prove nor disprove any of it. So that being the case, you have to have some measure of faith to say that this is true or that it is false. And that's up to the discernment of the individual. I don't tell anybody what to believe or what to think about this stuff. I just present you, this is what they say. This is what they claim. This is what they've documented. This is some of how they've backed up or reified their ideas. And it's the same thing with all of this. So this secret history, I think, is very important to understanding the state of world affairs today, because this is how they view it, and this is what they believe has happened in the past, and this is what they believe is coming next because of what it is that is at the core of their secret doctrine.
So you already touched on it. The term is root races. So Wayne, what is that, and where did they come from? And why are there, if memory serves, there have been 3 root races or even more? Or
Well, we're allegedly, I guess, the 5th root race, if I remember correctly, and this is, of course, what they call the Aryan race. And you'll know what World War II was really about if you begin to delve more deeply into that idea, because the Aryan race are not who you might think. And we'll I guess we'll go there. I know you put this up on YouTube, at least the first hour. Maybe we should save it for the second hour.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
But can we talk a little bit about the root races?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a thing that's confusing, a confusing part of their secret doctrine. Now, they claim that there are all of these sub races. Each of these epochs generated at least 7 sub races of the race. So if you go back to the Hyperborean epoch, the Lemurian epoch, the Atlantean epoch, there were 7 sub races for each. And the last sub race of each is what you would call a root race. Okay. So, like the last root race of the Lemurians were actually the first Atlanteans, you see. What ties over into this next period. So, this is what they're talking about with that. So, of course, we're said to be the 5th root race here now, the Aryan race in our modern era, in our modern spiritual evolution of mankind, according to their secret doctrine. I could be incorrect on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what they say. We're the 5th root race. So we are supposed to have 2 more iterations of this race coming, sub races, before the cycle's over and we advance to the next phase, which would be what we would call, in modern technocratic terms, as posthumanism. So the next phase from this 5th root race would be to what they would call the 6th sub race of the Aryan race, which would be what they refer to as the transhuman, this transitory state, into the next phase, which would be posthuman. So this would be the 7th, or the remnant of this 5th root race, that will transition to the next epoch and be the next early version or proto version of mankind of that age. This is what they claim. Okay, this is what they believe. And I hope I'm describing this in a way that makes sense for people, because oftentimes it's hard to put these notions into proper terms people could understand if they haven't heavily studied these concepts before. So this is what the claim is. So this would be what we would call the post-human right now, which would be the next phase in human evolution, according to these technocrats and these people that are pushing for this notion. So when that time comes, there's going to be a cataclysm that wipes out most of mankind, and this remnant that remains will transition to the next phase. Well, they want to hijack this phase. They want to merge man with technology and become this post-human, what we would refer to as this post-human. They want to be that remnant that remains. But I think it's all based on lies and falsehoods, in my estimation. They think they can proactively take charge of mankind's evolution. They call it guided evolution or self-guided evolution. They think they can do this. I don't think it's possible, but they do. And this is what they push for. And this is why they're so gung-ho about pursuing all of these technologies, even though they could potentially be harmful, which we've seen over the course of the past couple of years, haven't we? This is why they adopt that kind of thing. They want to take that risk. They don't care if they wipe out the bulk of the masses, because this actually falls in line with their eugenics programs. And this is where these ideas come from. It comes from these notions of these root races, of these old epochs, these different varieties of human beings that are said to have pre-existed us in certain ways. And this is also where the idea of evolution comes from. It's not something that Darwin invented. Let's put it that way. It's got its roots way deeper. And by the way, for those who were interested, Charles Darwin, most of his ideas were lifted from his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, who was actually a very high-standing member within some of these occult fraternities. So that's where he got a lot of his ideology from. So many people are unaware of that. And many people are also unaware that Charles Darwin was actually Sir Francis Galton's cousin. Well, who's Sir Francis Galton? He's the guy that invented the term eugenics. And that Darwin's work was built to reify the eugenics ideas. And this is what a lot of our modern culture is actually built upon. Transhumanism is this next phase of eugenics. In fact, pro-transhumanist groups out there, and there's a pro-transhumanist YouTube channel out there where I saw this and I was almost floored. their description of transhumanism. Now, remember, these are the ones that promote transhumanism. They're pro-transhumanism. They think it's the answer and the way forward. They call transhumanism, quote unquote, eugenics without coercion. That's what the transhumanists call it. Eugenics without coercion. So they see this as the way forward, and all these ideas have their foundation in all of that. So it all ties back to this notion of root races. And of course, why do you think they're ramping up racial tensions again in the modern era here? Why do you think that's always been a thing that's been with mankind? These racial tensions. Well, it all ties back to this notion of the secret schools of these root races and how some of them are superior to others. That's what they believe, and that's why we see much of what's been engineered into mankind in our modern era here.
Yeah. I read that Madame Blavatsky said the Lemurians were 2 meters tall. I don't know how much that is in foot, but it is tall. And they laid eggs, which I found very, very irritating. And that they were able to self-replicate, meaning that they didn't need a sexual partner for that. So, and then I looked up if we have something in the animal kingdom apart from, a singular cell. And yeah, actually, we have animals that can do both. They can replicate with a sexual partner and without. And among them are hammer sharks, the Komodo dragon, starfishes, whiptail lizards, and there are more, but I will stop it here. So does that make any sense to you with this tall egg-laying being?
Well, I could certainly tell you what it is that they teach within the secret society groups. And of course, Blavatsky took some of this and applied some of her own modern sensibilities to it at her time and combined some Eastern ideas with some Western ideas and brought forward this notion and applied her own agenda to it and gave some information that deviates slightly from some of the other traditions. Now, what the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor claims about this Lemurian race, they were giants between 12 and 15 feet tall. They had a third eye on the back of their head, and their eyes on the front of their head were more towards the side, so they could see all around them. They claimed that this third eye also gave them spiritual vision, which evolved out of mankind as we delved more firmly into physicality here. This is what they claim, and they claim over the course of the evolutionary process between Lemuria and Atlantis, that third eye moved inside the head and became the pineal gland, and that our spiritual vision was thus lost. They also claim that these 12 to 15 foot tall giants that were the Lemurians, they were equally able to move forward and backward with relative ease. So they could walk backwards just as easily as forwards, and they could see all around them. And maybe this has something to do with the notion of the old Cyclops mythology. Because you see, if you saw one of these things walking backwards, well, they were humans, but they weren't human beings in the same physical type structure as we are today, according to the secret sciences and the secret doctrine that they give us. So maybe that's where this notion of the Cyclops came from as well. And of course, they talk about through all different cultures what they call Cyclopean architecture, where we have these massive structures that have been built, these sophisticated structures
The
that are claimed to be.
era?
I'm sorry?
The megalithic era?
Yeah, the megalithic structures,
Mm.
these big blocks and stuff that they put in place, these big monuments that they built, some of them very sophisticated, that are claimed to be the remnants of a lost civilization. Well, this is what they claim it comes from. So we have all of this associated with them as well. And they were said at that point, at certain phases through this Lemurian epoch, that they were dual sexed and they could reproduce from themselves, but they lacked a lot of the intellect or intelligence of modern man, wherein they had that creative process. And this is something that kind of evolved through the course of time. So when they got to the Atlantean epoch, by that time, then the beings were divided into these two sexes, these two separate sexes, and sexual reproduction happened then. Before then, they were able to replicate of themselves, and it was kind of like what they would refer to as a budding process. This is how they've described it in the Hermetic sciences, in the Hermetic traditions. Like a flower will develop a bud, and then this germ will break off and grow into its own thing. Well, this is how they were said to have reproduced in the past. So they had both of these feminine and masculine aspects within them, and they were able to self-replicate in that way, but they lacked much of the intellectual capability of modern man, although they were able to build these megalithic structures. And they did have primitive forms of religion and primitive forms of socialization and stuff like that, primitive language, these kind of ideas in the later epoch, later portion of the Lemurian epoch. This is when language developed, because at that point they were still kind of spiritually connected because they had the spiritual sight. So they knew things and they were able to communicate in different ways than speech. So speech and language is said to have developed right at the end of the Lemurian epoch going into the Atlantean epoch. So this is what are some of the claims of the Hermetic teachings about this. So we have that notion certainly in play. And like I said, Blavatsky took some liberties with a lot of it and has made certain distinctions about things that don't align completely with the Hermetic tradition of it. And this is where I said they all teach the variations of the same thing, but they just differ on some of the details. But this is the details that have been put down by the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor regarding this Lemurian race. They were a race of giants, and they coexisted alongside of dinosaurs, and they actually domesticated and tamed dinosaurs for hunting. This is what the claims were of the occult schools. So, that being the case, this is where we get a lot of our notions of our modern take on what the scientific truth is in regards to this. And this all came about and culminated in this mid to late 1800s time period through groups like the Theosophical Society and through the traditions that were brought forward by the Rosicrucians into orders like the Order of the Golden Dawn, which were later formed, and these types of things. All of these ideas were thrown around in the occult subgroups of that time. And it's only a very small handful of prominent occultists who actually had these connections to all these different groups that promulgated these ideas forward into what you would call the modern school of occult thought. So this is where we get many of these notions from. And we see how it was kind of brought into the public psyche in this time frame, the mid to late 1800s. And this is the culmination of where we're at now. So all of these things were introduced into the greater zeitgeist at that time. And now we have a lot of different notions that we could look back and see where these traditions come from. And we could see how they started to, at that time, reify their already pre-existent beliefs in this stuff through the use of this tool of scientific method. And they developed our modern science, which science is the god of the new age. And I tell people this all the time. And certainly that is the truth, because this is exactly what they want. What they're trying to do is they're trying to reify these beliefs into some type of a physical material world type of viewpoint that culminates in what we have today and what's being developed today. And Rudolf Steiner referred to this as the spirit of Ahriman, this materialism, this gross materialism, this thought process wherein you try to equate everything back to some physical material world cause and effect sequence. And this is where they've firmly grounded mankind right now, in this belief that this is all there is. There's nothing that exists beyond this. There's no spiritual realms, nothing like this. That consciousness itself is nothing more than the byproduct of the electrochemical activity of the brain and brainstem. That's what they've tried to indoctrinate people into believing. And they've become very successful at doing that in large regard in the secular world. But they don't believe that themselves, the ones at the topmost levels of the power structure here. And that's what you have to keep in mind. That's the science for the masses, you see. That's not the secret doctrine. That's not the truth of the matter. It's always been this way. From time immemorial, you've always had this priest class that has been in control. The elites of this world, they have different forms of science, different forms of spirituality, different forms of religious practice, different forms of philosophy. They know something you don't. They have access to different information. They have different belief structures than we do. So they say this is good enough for the masses, but this is not what the truth is. This is the difference between the esoteric and the exoteric. They give the masses the exoteric doctrine. They hold to the esoteric doctrine. This is always how it's worked, and it's no different today. And when you understand that it's been transformed into this scientific paradigm that we're in today, then it all begins to click for you. When you realize much of what's presented as the most up-to-date modern science type idea that they claim is the truth above the truth above the truth, because it's demonstrable in an objective type of way. Well, what they're not telling you is there's an esoteric side to that too. And I find this all the time with any types of scientific publications. There's hidden language in there that suggests different spiritual connotations or ideas along with what the mainstream is. And it always ties back to these old occult doctrines and secret doctrines. And you just have to have eyes to see in order to know. It's a type of language they use. In Freemasonry, they call it the green language. It's also referred to sometimes as the phonetic Kabbalah. It's also known as the language of the birds. There's many different terms to describe this. It's a hidden communication system that the occultists in high positions of power use to communicate ideas one to another. It's a language of symbolism, and it's everywhere in our scientific literature, and people don't recognize it. Everywhere. It's all about the symbolism involved. And I find this all the time. I know it seems kind of like a side tangent, but certainly it is very much relevant to what we're discussing here today.
Yeah. So believe it or not, our first hour is already gone, and we will see the patrons on the other side.